All right. All right. So, welcome everybody. Thanks for showing up for the talk. I guess you can come for the pizza, stay for the talk. So yeah, I wanted to talk about a few things that I've been thinking about a lot. Optimizing for developer happiness is just something that I thought everything works towards loosely in my mind. So that's how I chose this title. I know everybody's very curious. Right. A little bit about me. So I've been working here at Solution Street for about 5 years. Since 2012, my first client was VeriSign. I worked there for about a year and 3 months. And then in Sound Exchange since then, mostly been doing web application development. I've worked on, again, a slate of programming languages. Started with Java, .NET, back to Java. Right now, it's mostly Python and JavaScript. You might say I'm a code cover. No, all right, so let's talk about what it is about developer needs, right? So what makes a developer happy? I mean, this is loosely based on Maslow's hierarchy of needs. It's a very short hierarchy. At the base, as developers, we are usually quite happy, especially here at Solution Street. Everybody's well fed. We have a chance to take a break whenever we want. If you're working in the office, there's excellent coffee. There's if Spencer's here, he'll grind some for you. French press coffee. So there's all these things. But then what lies at the top is basically just a few things that we can do proactively that that can help us just be happy, comfortable, just even more happier than we usually get. And also, and sometimes so let's talk about this, right? So these are a few things, at least that I've experienced quite a bit in my career. You tend to get overwhelmed with new technologies and concepts as basically being bombarded with new things every day. In some cases, implementing best practices that that is counterintuitive. Working with code that is hard to read, and finally, difficult and challenging team situations. Right. So what I wanted to do was basically use examples and figures and diagrams to kind of go through these topics in general. All right. So starting with trivia. Can anybody tell me what this might be? So the x-axis is the yearly plot from 2013 to today, and the y-axis is exponentially growing from 0 to almost 13 billion.
How many games you won?
That's close. Yeah, so this is basically the 28-day running total of NPM packages downloaded every month. So you can see this year, it's gone from 5 billion to almost 13 billion, right? So that basically just tells you how many new things are coming up almost every day, right? Just as we were talking about web application development, this is just a very small subset of choices that now we need to make, right? These are things that we didn't even have to choose a few years ago, right? There was no package managers. You wrote JavaScript. You didn't have to worry about Babel or TypeScript. But right now, you have to make all these choices, right? Of course, I mean, at the top is React, Angular. There's more things on top like Vue. Every time you start a new project, you have to go through this whole decision process, like how are you going to choose all these things, right? Let's just pick on Angular, right? For one, are you going to do Angular 1 or 2? I don't know. Yeah, so as you said, the versioning of Angular is moving on into semantics. So now the next version of Angular is 4. And just as I was writing the slide, I saw an article that said Angular 5. So, I mean, of course, now this is kind of maybe unfair on Angular because after version 2, they moved into semantic versionings, or 2, 3, 4, 5 are like dot versions, what previously would be like dot upgrades. I don't think these are actually 2 is not backwards compatible with 1, but at least 3, 4, 5 should be. But again, you have to still go through this process, right? So how do you do this? Once you've chosen how you're gonna, what big version of Angular you're gonna use, sometimes you may end up trying to figure out how you're gonna actually write the code, right? So this is loosely 5 different ways of writing the same controller in Angular, right? So this might not be a problem in some cases, but in some other languages or frameworks that you choose to work with, you have to again go through this process, because if you're working with a team, for example, everybody's new, this is new to most people. You don't want somebody to write it one way and somebody else to write it the other way. You end up with something that will basically be like, the third person will be like, so what is the right way? And they're like, I don't know, just figure it out. So that's basically something that can get in the way of of being productive, of just understanding what is going on. You might be working on a team where somebody's really attached to some sort of technology, and then you have to figure out why you want to do certain things, right? So in the end, I don't really have great answers for this. I just wanted to bring this up as something that we need to be aware about. At Solution Street, obviously, I think we do a better job than most other places that I've worked in. Like we have, like every time there's a new project, we look around to see who's good at a particular technology. We do tend to leverage each other quite well in helping out. I know that but that's something that we just need to be aware of as we start new projects, bring on new people, start a new feature even on a team, right? We have to be wary of decision fatigue, right? Analysis paralysis. You can get into an endless loop of just trying to figure out how you're going to, start something and how that might affect what we're doing. For the most part, what we should try to do is build a consensus within the team. Like there will be situations where not everybody will agree on how you want to proceed. Like for example, somebody might say, nah, let's not use Angular 5, it's too new. Angular 1 is, tried and tested, let's just do that. And somebody else will be like, so what's the point of doing something, in a way that has already been, end of life or whatever, right? But the idea is that once a decision has been made, like you want to then bring everybody on board, right? You kind of acknowledge everybody's differences, and then you bring everybody on board. The team should move forward as one. If possible, you should build in some time to learn. And we'll talk about this a little bit more also. And the other thing that you can do is, like, I didn't put it on the slide yet, but it was pick a style guide that can work for everybody. Use quick start tools if you're doing something new. Quick start tools, I've gone back and forth on those. Like you use bootstrapping tools that generate a lot of code for you, but they also generate a lot of fluff. So you have to be kind of wary of that. But if you're totally new at something, you start with a quick start tool, and then that can give you a leg up, right? So just something to be aware about. Again, so this collaborative learning is something that I think, again, that I've seen we've done a really good job at Solution Street of, at least on our project. Like what we do is we have a code review process. You try to review code in places that, if you're mostly working on the front end, maybe you should look at some of the modules, some back-end code, something that you basically learn as you go along. You ask questions. So code reviews don't have to be just to review the code. It can also be a way to learn a new technology or some things that you haven't done much of in the past, right? Pair programming is another great way of learning as you go along. Luis is leading a class right now for databases for everybody. That's something that is excellent. I was really happy to see that. That's really cool. Right. So that's all I have about that. All right. So the next part is talking about best practices. I'm going to take this away. I know, right? Yeah. I didn't break eye contact. You see that? I was like, yeah. Let me check my notes. All right, so the next section, we're just trying to pause to think about all the best practices that we've been taught, right? I think these two that I've chosen to put on the board are mostly like the first things that you learn, right? The first thing that anybody will tell you, like never repeat yourself, and then try to keep it simple as much as you can. What I'm trying to say is that maybe these two things, they're sometimes in conflict with each other, right? So you have to choose, you have to make choices. Previously, I think a while ago, many years ago, as you said, I'm kind of old. We had design patterns, right? We used to have we used to have rules where any code you write has to fit a pattern, right? So even like for a small, simple thing, you have to make sure it which is, I think the one that I remember that annoyed me the most was the data access object pattern, because you have to make sure everything is loosely coupled. So you copy everything from one object to another object to the third object. So you translate everything back and forth from the database to the front end. It was quite cumbersome, and I didn't really see the point in some cases, but but that's what we were doing, so we just continued doing that. So my point over here is that premature abstraction is bad. You shouldn't. Yeah, you can laugh. It's fine. Yeah. So but what I wanted to say here is that like abstraction obviously is a way to avoid repeating yourself. Like when you but when you start thinking about that too early, you might end up in situations where you're basically just making things more complicated than they don't need to be. Like two of the nicest web frameworks I've used are Rails and Django. Rails for Ruby and then Django for Python. When you look up the origin of both those frameworks, they both came from existing web applications, right? It wasn't like somebody tried to write a framework. Basically, people were writing web applications in Ruby and in Python, and then they were able to extract bits of that to make the framework, right? So I think that's probably the best way. Like the best frameworks probably do evolve from working code, right? So I think that was one thing. One of the most challenging projects that I've had to work on was one again where even before we started doing anything, like we had to maybe just read the database. The lead was like, but what if we have to read a file? What if we have to read something else, right? So we just ended up creating a whole slate of interfaces and implementations where we didn't really need that. Like it didn't really bring anything to the project. It was just, we could have just. So the idea is to you have to obviously be wary of when you have a roadmap and you're going to do certain things, then you build that into your project. But if you do it too soon, you might end up just causing more pain than it's worth. Right. So in this case, I would say I was a victim of this. In the next scenario that I'm talking about, I think I'm more like the perpetrator. So here, this is again another scenario where you have a programmer, say programmer A, it sees a small duplication. You see a duplicate. As soon as you see something duplicated, what do you want to do? You want to take it out. You want to create a class or a function or something, right? And then you say, oh yeah, I didn't repeat any code. This looks excellent. I just move on, right? The next guy comes in, programmer B. In this case, programmer B is still me. So you have the abstract, the fun function looks amazing. So you leave it the way it is, but then you have something that does almost the same thing, but just slightly different. So what do? You tack on a parameter to the function or something like that, and then you have a conditional call in your function that does something different for that particular scenario, right? But you don't want to inline the code into. What you should be doing maybe sometimes is just taking that code, creating a whole new function that does its own thing, right? But maybe not. So now once there was a common function that behaved same for everybody, now it behaves a little differently in some cases because now there's a conditional parameter involved, right? And now we just go through this many times, right? 3 or 4 times, and then you end up in a scenario where basically you have you have to really look at all the parameters being passed in, look at what the path of the execution is going to be through that, right? And then in the end, so again, as I said, in this case, I'm programmer A, B, C, and X, right? So now I'm dealing with the code that I've written that is impossible to figure out. Yeah. So yeah. So in this case, the conclusion that I've arrived at is in some cases it's maybe better to have duplication than a wrong abstraction. I don't force abstractions when they don't really fit. What is a wrong abstraction? That, as we said, a premature abstraction. Premature abstraction would be something that is, again, thinking about the abstraction too soon, or trying to find patterns where there may not be any patterns, right? You may be better having a separate class or a separate function for certain things. The rule of 3. I read this when I was looking up stuff related to this, I came across this interesting article which basically said there's a rule of 3, right? So when you have something repeated 2 times, don't be so quick to remove the duplication. At least wait till something happens 3 times, and then you may have a better idea. You may end up with something that is, more general, that works more evenly across all your scenarios. And that, I think that made a lot of sense to me. So I think I thought I should mention that. Any questions, comments so far? Well, I'll take another sip of water. This is going really well. We'll be done in like another 10 minutes, which will also everybody will be happy about that. Huh? I can repeat the whole thing. That's right. Not three times would be too much. Let me just play the video back. Oh yeah, so this is again another quote that I found, which I thought it kind of encapsulates what I was trying to talk about. I don't know. It's am I supposed to know?
I don't know.
All right. No, that's not Chris. I think it's just a old programmer guy, wise programmer guy. Yeah. All right. All right. So the next section, I just wanted to talk a little bit about readability. So this is something that I read. I found this I think on Twitter somewhere, but when I went back to search for it, I couldn't. So I think I just I want to make sure that I give attribute quotes wherever I can, but in this case, obviously I couldn't. Yeah, but this is something that I do believe in very strongly. Like, it's something that we kind of run into all the time. Reading code obviously is something that we do probably more than writing code. All of us are reading our own code. We're reading code from libraries. We're reading each other's code when we're doing reviews. So it is important that the code that we write, to the extent that we can, we try to make it as accessible to everybody as we can. I mean, we say everybody, it could also just be you 2 weeks later, right? I mean, you might just like, what is this? Who wrote that? And like, oh, you look at Git blame and it's you, right? So, and of course, like, I mean, since we are a consulting company, we are solving problems for our customers. Our customers have, complex problems to solve. So, our code in that way, I mean, it will be complicated to some extent, but again, we can do a few things that will make it will make it a little bit easier on us again and each other. Also help the maintainability, which will again help our customers. One of the things is naming. Yeah. So, I mean, I think I think I read a quote somewhere about this. It said naming is basically like half of programming is just figuring out what you want to call your variables and functions. I think that may be overstating it, but not too much probably. Var and var. So sensible variable names obviously are important. We need to. I mean, again, these are small things, but I think they're important. Function names are even harder, right? I mean, function names, I've had function names which says do this and then do that and maybe do this other thing, and then because you want to have descriptive function names, but then if you have a function name that is this long, that in itself may reveal that you have some issues in the way that you're writing your functions, right? The function is doing too many things, so that's something that you need to be worried about. This is something that happened to me a while ago. Like, I was trying to debug something in JavaScript, and it was a case where I was trying to figure out why something was working instead of why something was not working. And I'm like, how is this working? This is not supposed to work. And it turned out that the array variable was a string. Or it was the other way around, because I think I was trying to remember what it was. It was, I think I worked in Python and JavaScript a lot, as I was talking about, and in Python the join function takes it's on a string and it takes a list as a parameter, and in JavaScript it's the other way around, where it's an array will take a join, it'll have a join function, and the parameter is something that is, so it's basically like you have to again be a little bit wary of these things. This I thought was a really good example about how we can simplify some codes. Like, you have really long conditionals, but then you can use intermediate variables to convey what you're trying to do. again, make your code a little bit easier to read. In this case, if everything was in line, it would be a really long line, and then you'd be like, it's doing all these things, and but then here, because we're using intermediate steps, you know exactly what the purpose of the condition is, and it makes it a little bit easier to read.
Data not equal to null and data is not equal to validate data. Or data.
And validate data. There should be a parenthesis there, right? Yeah, that would make it even clearer. Yeah, you're right. This is another one of my pet peeves, especially with writing HTML. I think all of us are like really like crafty when we write really nice, JavaScript or Python code, but then when you see HTML, everything is just a mess. Like it doesn't get the respect that it deserves, and it does. It does need. I mean, of course, you can write messy code in Java too. Like as I said, I was working in Python, and Python, I mean, indentation is how blocks are made, so it's impossible to write messy code in Python to a certain extent. But again, like the example over here. This is something that we recently started doing. I think I was writing like if you just stack the attributes one on top of each other, it just makes it a little bit easier to read, right, if they're like right next to each other, right? So that just a small thing like that will just make things, especially when you're doing Angular, when you have like ng, like 10 ng things in one on one block. So yeah. Okay. The next is something about like just using personal quirks or language quirks. So this may not be a quirk, but when I first saw this, I mean, it kind of blew my mind. It's basically, again, it's two ways of writing the same thing. In the first example, everything is explicit. We're calling the get data method. We're getting the sample data from the server asynchronously, and we're setting it on the page in the greeting. If it exists, if not, we're defaulting to hello world. In the second example, sample data is just passed in. So I think that's something that, it could be passed in via the router because it's Angular. Don't want to get too much into that, but again, like the line below that where you're using the OR operator to kind of conditionally initialize that thing, right? So that's something that, I mean, it wasn't obvious to me, at least. I was like in my head, and the result of a Boolean operation is true or false. We're like, so what does that mean? Like greeting will be true or false? But in this case, no. The greeting, if the greeting exists, it's going to get initialized from the data. Otherwise, it's going to default to hello world. So what you might do in this case again is just add some comments or discuss it during a code review. Just make sure that everybody's aware that you're using this shortcut or this quirk, because again, I mean, these things are useful. It would get really tedious if you had to write a ternary operator every time or a big if then. So these shortcuts can be useful, but again, just have to make sure that everybody's aware about them. So I also ran into this. Can anybody tell me in what case this might not work?
To be a string of 0.
Right. Yeah. Or it could be like if you're trying to initialize a Boolean variable, right? Because if the data is false, it's always going to go to the default. It happened to me. I had a flag on a page, and then I was trying to initialize it, and I was like, wait, this is not going to work. So then I had to invert it to true, like to be, or like to have the value to be true. Right. Yeah. So again, code switching. This is also important. This is a kind of a pun, right? Because we are switching context between multiple languages. You have a project which uses JavaScript and Python, for example. You have to be kind of aware of this, like, subtle differences in the languages, and you use them intentionally or not, right? So this is going back to how in JavaScript, an empty array is through the. So if you're using it in an if statement, you have to be aware of that. But in Python, an empty array will return false. So if you're switching between JavaScript and Python and trying to look at the same set of code, you might have to be a little bit aware of that, or you would want to do it very intentionally, like you explicitly check for nulls or empties, things like that, and then that will make it clear for whoever is reading the code. Right. Yeah. So this is again a few more codes. I like the second code more than the first one. It's basically like, I think it brings together what I was the previous two sections. Like whenever you try to abstract something or try to refactor something, you want to always try to make the purpose of the of what you're doing a little bit more clearer, right? If you do something, if you introduce an abstraction that just makes it even harder to understand, I mean, that's maybe it's not worth it, right? Any questions or comments so far? Have you actually here? Since we have some time, I mean, does anybody have any examples about like things that they found interesting or quirky in languages or hard to understand? I have like go ahead.
Opposite of that, where
What?
I used to really like to do things like take data to and do the code block or whatever.
Yeah.
But that's, as we were talking about earlier, sometimes variables are falsy when they shouldn't be, like a number that's just supposed to be 0 will come out as false. So what we've taken to doing is using, at least in Storm, as much as we can, is using this -is_nil function.
Right.
So you can say like, all right, is it actually undefined or no?
Nothing, yeah.
And then, you can just use that as a way to clean things up a little bit.
Right, yeah, that's a great example. I think that's exactly what I was talking about. The other thing that I've had, I mean, I think I still don't understand lambda functions as well as I maybe should by now. It's hard to get your right. But what I've gotten good at is list comprehensions in Python. Again, that's a really good way to just conditionally initialize a list or something like that. But again, these are things that help. Like I think we've at some point I realized that we can get obsessed with trying to reduce the lines of code, like trying to achieve the most in the fewest lines of code. But in the end, like if you're working on a team, if you're working at something that needs to be easily understood by a large number of developers, that may not be the best approach. Right. So this is the last section here. So here I just wanted to talk about teams, right? I mean, how we work within teams. These are two things that have been proven to be true, right? I mean, the best software, usually, I mean, you will be working in a team. Best software is not delivered by one or two high-performing individuals. It's delivered by a team that works well together. One of the best ways for a team to work well together, to have everybody basically, behave, be nice, be empathetic, something that, that we probably don't talk about too much, but something that is really important. So this term psychological safety is something that came up in research. I think Google did this big study, but it was in the news a few months ago or maybe a year ago. It's about what this is basically the belief that everybody feels free to take a risk within the team. Like everybody from the most junior-most person to the senior-most person behaves in a way that is empathetic, and that, like, just because you're junior or new to the project doesn't mean that you feel that you cannot bring up an issue or a question that you might have. Just everybody. So yeah. So what does this mean, right? You shouldn't nobody should feel like they can be punished when they make a mistake. Like it's fine. I mean, mistakes happen; they're fine. But you have to have the security that you to take a risk, to go ahead and to try something out. And then if it doesn't work, fine. But at the same time, you learn from it, and that's also important to learn from your mistakes. You can't make the same mistake over and over again. That might not work out. The ability to ask stupid questions without any fear for repercussions. A lot of time, I mean, again, people don't ask questions because they feel that's too stupid. A good example of this is I mean, maybe I shouldn't call him out, but is a guy at Sound Exchange. One of our colleagues at Sound Exchange. I mean, he's Ajay. He always felt like he couldn't ask any questions. But then we had to really coach him up, saying that don't worry about it. We have everybody in the team is confident in your ability. Any questions you have are good questions. And now I think he's at a point where he can actually ask. He doesn't feel like that anymore, and he's able to ask questions. And again, these things will obviously contribute in the end to a better solution, right? If somebody doesn't feel like speaking up where they see a problem in the solution, where you might feel like, am I the only one seeing the problem with this? Everybody else seems so gung-ho about what we're doing, and I see that we are kind of heading towards disaster, right? So by not speaking up, you're actually doing a disservice to your team, right? Because later you might find out that I actually saw this was happening, and then at that point you just feel worse, right? Right. Right. So how do we encourage this kind of behavior, right? So you have to start small. Make sure that everybody, like, you have when you have a meeting, you encourage everybody to speak up. When you have a solution or a code review, feel like, everybody should feel comfortable in asking the question, but why you did this a certain way, or contribute a new idea, like, hey, what about we did it this other way? This is something. The second part here is very important. Like, the idea that you should be able to invite somebody else with their expertise, especially when that they might not agree with you. Like, obviously there are situations within teams where somebody thinks a certain way, somebody else will come up with this. If they were given to solve the same problem, they would probably solve it, but in a completely different way, right? So you have to figure out, like, maybe when you're trying to do a code review or something like that, just ask them, like, hey, what do you think about this? And they might come up with a better idea. And finally, you will have to make sure that we reinforce this kind of behavior. You have to, when somebody does ask a question or a question that may be a little simplistic, make sure that actively, like, nobody's making fun of them or they're being punished for that. Like, just acknowledge the question, answer the question. This is really important, especially in diverse teams. Like, we have, again, a lot of, like, we have small teams and large teams here. We have teams that everybody's backgrounds are starting to be different. So people might come in with a different set of assumptions and experiences, and they may not know what is okay. And it's for us to actually, like, to be able to bring everybody up to that level where everybody feels comfortable speaking their mind and asking questions, right? Yeah. That's all I have. Well, this place. Questions, discussion? I don't know. I think we went pretty quickly through this.
From my experience with large teams, more often it's better to do than partially correct.
Yeah.
You may get a coding cowboy who goes off and goes off and does the right thing, but leaves everything else behind. Even if it's not ideal, it's important. It's easier to do.
Right. Yeah. Also, one thing that I forgot to mention here, right? In this particular case, here, I felt like this is something that you want to be true, right? There's something that it feels like it would suck if research showed that a brilliant jerk can override all the nice things that like behavior. But luckily, this is, like, I mean, something that should be true, and it's proven to be true. Yeah. I just forgot to mention that earlier.
Those podcasts of saying that, like, the biggest factor to collective intelligence or, like, higher success within a individual was, like, kind of like social skills and
Right.
being able to communicate that you're talking about.
Yeah.
So it's not like one person.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I think increasingly we're seeing this in the news too, right? I mean, software development is essentially, everything is a people business, right? I mean, software development is also collaborative and, in the end, a people-oriented business, so it's important. Yeah. Anything else? Right. Thanks, everybody. Yeah. Stop recording.